So today in literacy, we're still thinking about questioning. Last week we looked at question stems, and this was the table that I showed you, and it demonstrated different types of questions. The green ones, write their questions when the answer was right there in the text. The yellow, think and search questions, where you had to look in the text, possibly in a few places to find the answers. The red, the author and me. For example, it might be looking at the author's technique. Okay, and finally the blue, on my own. These were more about your own opinion in relation to the text. Okay. We're still learning to question, and our success criteria today, we're focusing on designing open-ended and closed questions. So what's the difference between open and closed questions? Open-ended are questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. They need a little bit more detail. Closed questions, they can be answered with a yes or no or a limited amount of information. For example, a closed question would be, what's your address? So today we're going to be looking at Bloom's taxonomy question stems. And there are 6 different types. Some are open and some are closed. It tells you on the right-hand side whether they are open or closed. Let's look at the first one. Remember, this is just when you have to recall appropriate information from the text. Examples of stems include questions starting with the word who, where, when did, how many, what happened before, can you name all? So for example, our class novel, George's Secret Key to the Universe. If I asked you to come up with some questions based on what we'd read, and I'd asked you to come up with a remember question, which is very similar to a write there question, it could be, who is Annie's dad? Understand, that's the next set in the Bloom's taxonomy question stems. And this is also a closed question like remember. That means that it's either a yes or no answer, or it just requires a little bit of information. These could start with, can you clarify? That means prove you understand something. Is this the same as, or what does such and such mean? So an example of that kind of question could be, can you clarify what an astronaut wears in space? And again, I've thought about our class novel in thinking up of that question. And because of what we've read, most of us would be able to answer that question, and it would be a spacesuit. Now we're going to the apply section. And as you can see on the right-hand side, sometimes apply questions can be open or closed. And in these questions, you're using what you've learned in a new situation. So these types of questions could begin with, what would happen if? How would you explain? What factors might you change if? So they're open-ended sometimes, and if it's open-ended, you've got to think more deeply. But an example of this kind of question, if we use on class novel again, would be, what would happen if Dr. Reaper knew that George was at his house? Okay, you see how I'm thinking about what we've read, and then I'm coming up with questions based on what we've read. And it also shows that I've understood what we've read as well when setting these questions. Let's go on to analyze now. Analyze is are open-ended questions, and again, you've got to think more deeply. So analyze is when you've got to break down what you've read to kind of help you understand the text. So you could begin a question with, how is this similar to? Similar means the same. How might you illustrate? That means draw. If we changed something, how might that affect something? Remember, these are all starters, if you like, or stems, how a question might be started. So, for example, we've been working on procedural texts, haven't we, for a few weeks, and you watched a video about making a peanut butter and jam sandwich. So if somebody had written a procedural text about how to write a sandwich, maybe once you've read that text, if you were asked to come up with a question, it could be using one of the analyze stems. Let's look at the last one. If we changed peanut butter to an apple, how might that affect the sandwich? And then if somebody had to answer that, they would have to put quite a bit of detail, I think, into that and think quite deeply about their answer. We've got two more. Evaluate. And examples of these questions would be, what is your opinion of? What is the most important piece of? If you were the judge, what would? So again, open-ended. Let's think. Can you come up with a question yourself using those three stems? Maybe thinking about our class novel. For example, what about the second one? What is the most important? Maybe we could change it to what is the most important feature of Cosmos? So there's a question. It's an evaluation question. What is the most important feature of Cosmos? And in answering that, you would be making a judgment. Let's go on to the final section, create. Again, open-ended. This is when, based on what you've read, you have to think about generating, planning, or producing something new. Examples include, if you created your own something, how might you? How would you improve? Or finally, how might you design a something to something? So to help you understand that, I thought of an example using the last stem. How might you design a board game to complement the book, George's Secret Key to the Universe? And again, if you were to answer that question, you would need to actually build or create something new. So these are the 6 Bloom's taxonomy question stems, and they result in a variety of different types of questions, some open-ended and some closed. Now, if you're finding that a bit tricky to understand, I'm going to help you using some of the Wonder text. So just like last time, we'll read the text and then I want you to try and think of some questions. Friends. I have a few really good friends now. Christopher is my best friend, followed by Zachary and Alex. We've known each other since we were babies, and since they've always known me the way I am, they're used to me. But when we were little, we used to have play dates all the time, but then Christopher moved to Bridgeport in Connecticut. That's more than an hour away from where I live in North River Heights, which is at the top tip of Manhattan. So that's a little bit of the text. We're going to think of a question during this reading process. So, as I've said at the bottom here, I'm going to just read it here. It says, let's think of a closed question using the text above. This could be a question that requires the person to remember something from the text. That was one of the first sections or types of questions from the Bloom's taxonomy. It could start with who. Maybe, and some of you might have thought of a good one already, who is August's best friend? Because that answer is in the text, and I bet some of you know that answer as well. Or a remembering question could start with where. Can you have a think? Can you make up your own question that begins with where based on that text? It could be, where does Christopher live? Or some of you might have said, where does the main character live? Because of course the answer to that is North River Heights. Let's try some more. Let's read the next part of the text. Zachary and Alex started going to school. It's funny, even though Christopher's the one who's moved far away, I still see him more than I see Zachary and Alex. They have all these new friends now. If we bump into each other on the street, they're still nice to me though. They always say hello. That's the text. Now let's look at the next section of this PowerPoint slide. Let's try an open-ended question now. These do not have a simple answer. What about an evaluate question? So remember those stems that we looked at earlier? And of course, remember you can pause this video and rewind at any time if you need to go back to the different types of questions. So it could start with, what is your opinion of? Now, can you think of something based on what we've read? So I've put an example there, maybe, what is your opinion of Zachary and Alex? So that's a question. It's an evaluate question. It's an open-ended one. And it's based on what we've read. And if we were giving someone that question to answer, they would need to look in the text, wouldn't they, to find the answer and give a detailed answer and think deeply. Let's go on to the next bullet point. Another open-ended create question could start with, how would you improve? So I've given you an example, maybe, how would you improve the author's description of Zachary and Alex? Final part of the text. I have other friends too, but not as good as Christopher and Zach and Alex were. For instance, Zach and Alex always invited me to their birthday parties when we were little, but Joel and Emma and Gabe never did. Emma invited me once, but I haven't seen her in a long time. And of course, I always go to Christopher's birthday. Maybe I'm making too big a deal about birthday parties. Okay, that was the final part of the text. So far we've designed, remember, evaluate, and create types of questions. Let's try another type of closed question. What about an understand question? A question that asks what a word from the text means. So you would just choose a word, a wow word, okay? And it would simply go, how about what does invited mean? Let's finish with an open-ended analyze question. It could start with, how is this similar to? Maybe, how is this similar to your experience of friendships? So in that type of question, the analyze question, it's very similar to the types of questions we looked at last week, which were called on my own. So you're thinking about your own personal experience and comparing it to the text and what's happened in the text. So your learning activity today is just using your own reading book to try and design at least 5 different types of questions and to try and have a mix of open and closed questions. Don't worry too much if you can't remember the different types of questions, the balloons. Don't get too stressed. I'm just looking for at least 5 different types of questions. So good luck, and remember you can look back at this video as much as you need to help you, and I will also put this video up as a PowerPoint in case you'd rather flick through that instead on Teams. Good luck.